All right, guys, let's continue really digging deep into programming here. So I want to introduce you guys to what a mesocycle might look like as far as volume and how we control for it, and why when we write percentages up on the board for our workouts, kind of how that fits into the grand scheme and the big picture of things. So first, let's talk about what volume means. Volume just means the number of reps you're doing multiplied by the weight you're doing it at. What we like to use, I simplify it in my spreadsheets and my programming methods, and I just make it relative volume. So I'm not really too worried about the actual weight you're doing. I'm worried about multiplying your percentage by 100 to make it a regular number to standardize it. So I'm multiplying the number of reps you're doing. So 3 sets of 5 would be 15 reps at 65%. So I'd do 15 times 65, so relative volume would be 975. The reason I like to use relative volume is because when we start looking at a deadlift versus squat versus strict press, the amount of weight we actually move is very different between those movements. So what I like to really focus on is for lower body, how much relative volume are we getting in? Because if we're doing exercises that don't use as much weight, I still want to account for how fatiguing those actually are. So how the framework looks across a month. So we'll say, and again, each of our mesocycles, we have our big macro cycle. Within that, we're working up to a specific event. Within that, we have multiple mesocycles. We typically have a hypertrophy, a strength, a peaking, and we might have multiple hypertrophy and multiple strength in there. Within each one, each of these are going to be anywhere between 2 and 6 weeks generally. And for our purposes today, we're just going to talk about a 4-week mesocycle. So within 4 weeks, what we're trying to do is progressively overload you, making your volume higher and higher and higher. So this way we kind of have a wave going as we go through our cycles here. And so what we're looking for is that the total number of reps you're doing multiplied by your relative weight, if we add all of that up in week one will be about 20% of the total volume you're going to be doing in the month. We're going to ramp that up a little bit. Week 2 is going to be about 23%. Week 4, 27. Sorry, week 3, 27. Week 4, 30. So generally, all of the squatting, all of the pressing, all of these things, we want all of the work you're doing to land in these ranges. And that way we can really control how we ramp you guys up and control how much you're doing and make sure that you're able to recover from what we're doing, but we really want you to maximally adapt, and that's why we control so carefully what you guys are doing. Just to give an example of what this might look like in practice, this example would be for one exercise. So what we would want to do is have a general idea of what this looks like for every exercise we're doing in that month and make sure everything fits together. But if we just pick one exercise, we'll just use back squat for example. If week 1 we did 3 sets of 5 at 65%, our relative intensity, our relative volume would be 975. If week 2 we just ramped up 5% and we did 3 sets of 5 at 70%, now we have a relative volume of 1050. 3 sets of 5 at 75%, we got 1125. 3 sets of 5 at 80%, we've got 1200. So if we look at these, if we add up the total volume for the month, we've got 4350. With that, we can look at what percentages we hit in each of these weeks. So week 1 would be 22.5%. Week 2 would be 24.1%. Week 3 would be 25.9%. And week 4 would be 27.5%. So we didn't hit these exactly, but we're pretty close to it here. So we can play around with these rep schemes if we want, or we can adjust our other volumes from the other WODs and the other lifting and everything else we're doing to compensate for this to ultimately get these numbers here. But in action, that's kind of what it looks like, and that's how we control for it. So now what we can do is we can make sure that we're progressing ourselves up week after week after week before we back off and progress ourselves up week after week after week as we repeat this through our cycles. Again, each of our cycles have a different purpose. A hypertrophy cycle is going to be muscle building. What we're going to see in a hypertrophy cycle is much more volume and much less intensity. Intensity is going to be how much weight you're lifting, how hard are you going. So we're looking for longer, slower workouts. We're looking for strength sets between 8 and 12 with intensities around 60, working up to like 75%. So more reps, less intensity in these hypertrophy cycles as we're trying to build. As we work through our cycle here, ultimately in our macro cycle, our strength mesocycles are going to be less volume as the volume gets smaller and smaller, but higher intensity. As we get into our peaking phase, we're going to see yet again less volume and high intensity. So really, this strategy is how do we know we're actually doing less volume? We can look at our relative volume numbers, all the reps we did that week multiplied by the intensities or the weights or the percentages at which we did them, and we can make sure we're heading this way. How do we make sure the intensities are going up? We can look at the percentages that we're using. We can also look at the duration of the workouts, and we get shorter and shorter as we drive that intensity up and up and up. So in general, this is how we kind of build it out, and this is how we carefully control what you guys are doing in the gym, and that way we can look at, did it work? And if it didn't, we can make our little adjustments here and there. But it's way more, even though on a daily basis, weekly basis, it may look like we're just taking a bunch of workouts and throwing spaghetti against the wall. There's a lot of thought and there's a lot of science that goes into why we're doing this. So if we dig deeper into, is this a good rep scheme at this intensity, what we're going to start relying on now is Prilepin's chart. You can Google that. It's basically the gold standard in weightlifting for what is the right amount of work to be done. Like we talked about in a previous video, we want to set up each day in a way that we are getting at least a minimum dose of work and at most a maximum dose. So Prilepin's table or Prilepin's chart really helps us stay within those minimums and maximums. So within a week, we can set up really hard sessions and easier sessions so we can manage that fatigue as we go along, and we can manage that fatigue as we build up in these cycles. All right.